was very much coming from a place of just like scratching the itch of why the f does this picture make my brain feel so strange?
It's a real mess, but also beautiful in a way.
I want to talk a little bit about some of your early influences. I know video games were huge for you growing up.
Yes.
Can you maybe explain a little bit about some of the first 3D spaces that you explored in video games and what sort of influence that had on you?
The most obvious one and like the strongest one without a doubt would be anything that Valve has touched. So like obviously I think it's probably pretty apparent that Portal is like my biggest inspiration in life at all with any of the stuff I've ever made. Portal 2, both of them. Half-Life as well, like anything in that universe has kind of been my most like foundational childhood inspiration. I think that's where I like actually would have begun using the term no-clip.
No-clipping, kind of moving through physical
Yeah,
objects
within source.
in
Like whenever
space.
I wanted to go like find the cake at the end of Portal or something, I would go down to the basement and I would find it. And then I've been into Gary's mod for just about as much time as well. So I guess Source Engine has kind of just been like the main space I've played with all that stuff over the years. But you know, I used to be very into, I mean, it was kind of a rite of passage to be into Minecraft, and I personally was into Little Big Planet, and so like a lot of like sort of sandbox creation games were kind of my thing.
I can definitely see the Half-Life and Valve influence on some of your work. I was actually thinking about this as the kind of stuff you can start to pick up on second viewing. Do you use the door opening sound effect in Backrooms?
It's very possible.
You see, I've been playing those games for my entire life, and if I hear a door open, I feel like a head crab is gonna come for me or something like that. Very well placed. I really enjoyed that little Easter egg. For anybody that is not familiar with Backrooms, could you maybe tell us what it's about?
Backrooms is a film born out of this YouTube series I've been doing for a number of years that is derived from an even stranger place, that being a anonymous 4chan post from 2019. Where someone posted an image of a sort of dingy yellow wallpapered, murky carpet, drop ceiling, fluorescent lights. We know now, people found out it was the back of a furniture store being renovated, but it looks like any generic kind of just unpleasant office space that's totally unfurnished. And so that photo plus the caption of sort of setting up the idea of like, if you no-clip, which is the video game term for like falling out of reality, if you fall out of reality from no fault of your own, you may, in the wrong areas, whatever that means, you may end up in the backrooms. And it sets it up as basically just being this infinite expanse of that environment I just described. So it's kind of like a very benign version of like a sort of purgatory or hell myth, but without any kind of damnation aspect. It's inherently a force of nature that you can't negotiate with, and it doesn't pull you in because you did something wrong. It does it because reality broke. I think it has a horror aspect to it inherently, but it wasn't really utilized in many ways until I had sort of the desire, because of these liminal space photo compilations that have been going on for a while. I've been using Blender for a few years, the 3D program. What would it be like to actually move the camera around in that space and actually investigate it a little bit more? And it wasn't designed, I didn't even know if it was gonna be a short film at first. It was kind of just almost like the very first shot was an isolated VFX test. But it was very much coming from a place of just like scratching the itch of why the f does this picture make my brain feel so strange? Why does it feel like a place that I've been in before? Why does it feel, why does everyone say it feels like a place they've been in before? And some of those things we can clearly talk about, and obviously it's a very generic environment, like I said, so that's a big part of why it feels like everyone's been there before. I created this series online for a few years, and I went down a very kind of hard sci-fi route with it, where what if this MRI Research Institute accidentally got access to this thing and they can't that's it, that's the only supernatural variable. It's like, this place exists, they don't know anything about it, they know zero, and okay, go, what's gonna happen next? What are the ramifications of this logistically and economically? I very cautiously sort of developed this project over a number of years, and until we have now this more human-first sort of character-driven, intimate version of that world.
All right, you filming? Yes. Follow my lead.
One of the signature aspects of Backrooms' visual language is this idea of no clipping, and it is something that it really attacks our mind in terms of being something that should not be, which is such a weapon of liminal horror, I think. Were there any other video game design elements that you kind of went out of your way to include in this, and how do you go about attaching feeling and narrative meaning to those sorts of things?
So in the original short film I did, I played into the video game idea a tiny bit more than I have wanted to since. I wouldn't recognize that first video as like holy canon in every single way to the rest of the body of work. It's a little bit like a pilot. You know, there's like one moment that I did is like, I found it to be a humorous goof, but people ended up taking it very literally, where like the life form in that video like is T-posing and just sliding on the floor and clips through a wall. I kind of knew immediately as well that like after I released it, it's like I wanted to take a much more hard sci-fi approach to that world and not use language like this took place in 1990. And even if it took place today, I don't think most people would be using the language no clip if they saw a chair suddenly fall through the ground. I think they would say phase or slip.
Or they'd be screaming in terror because this is
there's not a link
possible.
That's what I mean. It's sort of like pulling away from any sort of like overly convenient rule book for language or anything like that, and focusing more on if everything about reality was identical to the timeline that we live in, and everything is exactly the same, and the one variable is the backrooms exist and they are accessed at this one point in time somehow. Just letting everything else kind of feel like a natural reaction to that, and letting people have to create their own vocabulary for it themselves and their own way of framing it and trying to reckon with what on earth this thing is that makes no sense. And so there's a lot of questions I think that would come up before they just look at a thing and go, oh, that's no clipping. That's a liminal space down there. That's the backrooms. It's like they wouldn't, that's level 100. Like there's a bunch of interpretations of the backrooms, but I feel like mine doesn't play into the game aspect too much. I try to go more like a force of nature.
What the
You had some horror heavies helping you get this thing to the finish line. James Wan, Oz Perkins, both producers here. Can you maybe speak a little bit to some of the contributions that they made and some of what you learned from them?
Yeah, I mean, like when I went up to, because we did all of this in Vancouver, like really the thing that marked the beginning of like actually working on this film was when I met with Chris Ferguson, the producer up there, and then I go up there, we do a test shoot, and pretty quickly we're going into prep on this project, and that's when I like met Oz properly, and he had gone and looked at everything I put on my YouTube channel, including all the stuff I wouldn't want him to see and whatnot, and we had a conversation about it, and it was like he had been in my brain for like 10 years, and he absolutely got what I was trying to speak to there, even stuff that like a lot of my audience hasn't quite decided to talk about yet, I suppose. So it was exciting to just like find someone to talk about these things with. He's a great friend at this point, and I feel like throughout the process he's just been a really strong ally with shielding off some of the noise or the pressures to sort of conform this project, which comes from kind of a weird place. And there's been nerves around like what's going to work and what's not, and he's very much like held the door open to making sure that this is going to be a truthful migration of what was working online to the big screen. So I very much thank him for that.
You still haven't told us what we're doing here, man.
I did tell you. Research.
This is kind of your first time working with actors of the caliber of somebody like Chiwetel Ejiofor or Renate Reinsve. What did you learn about the process of directing actors through these two, and what did they unlock about their own characters that maybe even surprised you?
I think that like I've worked with actors under the context of them being my friends, but it's not even like, it's a very different landscape, and it's a very different situation. What I did find was that before we started, I was overthinking like every detail and like, really just trying to make sure that I had a good grip on what actually directing entailed. I think what I found though is like we had 2 months of prep. I got to know Chiwetel and Renate and everyone else like pretty well before we go into this, and so like the anxieties went away pretty quickly when it was just like, oh, these are people and we get along and we talk about the same things and we understand what we're making, and we can just talk normally. It doesn't have to be some weird sort of alien thing that I guess I had hyped up in my head. But it became a pretty smooth process of just like we uncovered a lot of things about the characters, and I would say this of all the films, all the ways films can go, I would say that this one definitely had a pretty like fluid script that evolved as we went quite a bit, and in a very positive way. It went towards, I think, what we always kind of set up as a North Star. We unlocked like a good deal of, I think, clarity in how we wanted to portray the over-reliance on like a faulty system that Renate's character Mary has, and like the audiobook and tape stuff kind of came later on in the process. We sort of invented some of that. We knew we wanted it, but we didn't quite get it initially, so we found a way to do it a little sharper. With Clark, I think generally the more we talked about him, the more we had a hard time doing anything other than like kind of just being sympathetic for the guy, and like for all the flaws that he can so easily point out, I think there's, hypothetical versions where he was a lot less sympathetic and a lot less humorous and whatnot. And I think we found a version that is very, he's endearing when we meet him, and when he's, I think even in the marketing we've put out so far, just seeing a man in kind of an empty furniture store doing this commercial is already kind of telling a story. And I think obviously the film takes that little bit that has already piqued a lot of people's interest online and builds it into something that I think is a pretty complete and compelling arc, honestly.
And the only thing you'll be wanting is more space!
I found it so interesting that Clark has a background as an architect, Mary is a psychiatrist. I found that such an interesting way to get into both the physical and the mental aspects of the Backrooms. Was that part of your design at all?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's actually a little obvious, if anything. It's like, given that like those are the two biggest things that come together when you talk about Backrooms, but I think that Clark wanted to be an architect, and in a lot of ways I'm sure he's got the formal training, but clearly he is not, and you can see some of the stuff he's been working on, and you maybe can understand why things didn't work out fully in some ways, but nevertheless he's holding on to this idea that it is still a very real thing that was kind of taken from him and is still on the table in some way. I think that part, especially with the architecture, is essential to sort of seeing the initial side of why he might be sort of enamored by this place and what it might be sort of activating for him, this sort of long dormant part of himself. And then for Mary, obviously, it's essential to have that other side of the equation where she's, sort of gets to see the result of, like, for all the work she does with individuals, the sort of cumulative effect of these systematic features of society, which are maybe wearing people down in ways that she wasn't even aware of initially, and are sort of more all-encompassing than she even knows how to do anything about. It's kind of paralyzing.
Hello?
You have built up this really interesting mythology coming into this movie that your fans are so knowledgeable on and looking forward to seeing put on the big screen. How did you go about balancing elements like async with the knowledge that a lot of people coming into this movie may have no idea what that is?
Growing up around so many AirGs and web series and indie-driven projects, I feel like I've spent like a good portion of my childhood and life just kind of seeing like this pattern of like a project not too dissimilar from mine getting some sort of traction, getting big, and then the theorist community, if you want to call it that, that arose in like the 2010s kind of really jumps on it, gives it a lot of attention, a lot of presence. A lot of younger people are very into it, but then like the word lore starts to come up and it starts to sort of eat this thing. I think you either have the choice to either double down into feeding into that group in a very like direct way where it becomes, something of like, I'm using the word lore bloat a lot. I swear I'm not trying to PR engineer this phrase. I just happen to say it a bunch in the past few days. But like it really does run the risk of just totally defeating the ability of this project to actually resonate with anyone who's not now already in that in-group. And it becomes kind of inaccessible if it goes too far into that world. I could name a lot of properties that have done that. I think the alternative, which I think is the position I've wanted to take, is going back to that point of simplicity with why the Backrooms concept worked in the first place. Identify what about that can fuel the engine of this film, but then, let the elements of the series that I've established thus far be still, structural background features of the world they're in. Like, I think it facilitates setting, but not direct plot, I would say, if that makes sense. Let the simplicity fuel the plot, and then the background is the background.
Well, you've also spoken in the past about the fact that you do have a pretty clear idea of where you want Backrooms as a story to go. You have a fairly cohesive idea of that, maybe even wrapping it up in a series. When you think about continuing the Backrooms story, is that something that you can see letting other people into helping tell that story? Or right now, do you feel like you'd really want to be at the helm for the whole thing?
It's my favorite project in my life. And for me, making stuff is a pretty deliberate personal affair. So I feel like, I love collaborating with people, but in terms of actually, but also I should recognize that if you're going into a series, yes, you have to start talking about collaborating and whatnot. So versions of this, yes. I'm all for. But if the question is this something that I want to be as a part of as possible for the entirety of its existence, the answer is definitely yes.